You're listening to the Journey to Launch podcast, paying off $600,000 of debt with Dr. Nii Darko. Hey, Journeyers. So on today's episode, I have someone that I've actually known for a while now, Dr. Nii Darko. And Dr. Nii, I feel like we first met in person at like Podcast Movement, maybe. Yeah. I feel like we had a conversation there. Dr. Nii, in addition to being a trauma surgeon, has his own podcast and does a bunch of other things. But we met at Podcast Movement, and then you went to FinCon one time too, because I remember talking to you there. So we've known about each other for a while, and I thought it was time to have you on the podcast because your debt payoff story, which is like amazing. You said you paid off $662,000 of student loan debt. Insane. And as a doctor, you're also a creative, and still you do things on the side to earn money. So I want to get into all the things. Welcome to the podcast. Hey,
thank you very much, Jamila, for having me on. Congratulations to everything that is happening with you. And your memory is ridiculous. Like some of the stuff, I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah. You are actually right about that. But yeah, your memory is great.
Yeah, well, okay, so I don't even know where to start with your story, but I feel like the debt payoff. Okay, so you're a doctor. So explain to us what kind of doctor you are, and then we can talk about your student loans.
Yes. So hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Nii. I am a trauma surgeon. So I do surgery on people who have been in a car accident, people who get shot, people who get stabbed. If your grandmother falls and has a head injury, I'm the doctor who's going to take care of them. I also do emergency surgery. So if your appendix needs to be taken out or any type of surgery that you can think of in an emergency standpoint, that's what I do. And I've been practicing on my own since 2012. And shortly afterwards, when I started practicing on my own, I realized that me and my wife were broke. And it's really hard to imagine that as two physicians. My wife is OB, and we went to the same med school, but we were two broke physicians. And long story short, we're here now with you, but that's kind of how we started.
Okay, first of all, it's funny how you say I have such a good memory because my memory, it remembers, basic things. You are a surgeon. Like, the things you have to do and the way your brain works, in my head, I'm just like, oh, my goodness. Obviously, you're using your memory for the important things. But I love that you and your wife are doctors, and you said you found yourselves broke. At that moment when you discovered or had that realization, how much broke were you? That doesn't even make sense. Well, how much in debt were you?
No, I get what you're saying. Like, can you be broken and broke?
Right.
Like, that's kind of how we felt, right? And I think the key thing is when people listen to this podcast, you're like, well, how's two doctors broke? There's absolutely no way. Yes, there is, right? Like, if you think about having negative net worth, that's exactly what we had, right? Like, we worked hard just like anybody who's listening to the show. And just imagine you're studying and you study into your 20s. And unlike other people or most people who go into a regular job and they start working and they're slowly but surely paying off debt and building wealth, we're still in the classroom. We're still studying. And then from there, we go into training and we're still studying, right? We're not bringing in any income whatsoever, but also at the same time, our debt is accumulating, right? Interest on a daily basis is accruing. So by the time I graduated from medical school, I had $240,000 in student loan debt. My wife also went to the same med school as me. We both got our MBAs. So you have to throw in additional private loan debt with the MBA. And then once you become a resident, literally from 6 in the morning, even 5 in the morning until basically 8 o'clock at night or what have you, you are in the hospital taking care of patients. You are learning how to do things. There's a lot of overnight call. So a lot of times once my grace period ended with Sallie Mae or whoever owned my student loans, they would start calling. And this is 2006 when I first started residency. I bought a townhome, which I probably should not have done so, but I bought a townhome because I felt like I deserved it. And I put the caveat of this is 2006. I had no money. I didn't have to put any money down, so it was super easy for me to get a mortgage. And then, shortly afterwards, 2008 occurs. But Sallie Mae would call, and I remember they would call me, and I would be like, listen, I don't have time in between patients to talk about this. I have no clue how to handle my debt. What do I need to do to get you to stop calling me? And they said, you can forbear. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. Click, bye. And that was the last I ever heard of them for, several months. And then they would call back, and I would do the same thing. And in between that time, on a daily basis, the loans are just accruing and accruing interest. So fast forward 5-6 more years, I finished in Miami doing trauma, and my loans had ballooned from $240 to $330,000 of student loan debt, right? And it's the same thing with my wife. Same thing. She was ducking calls too. Like, I'm busy. I ain't got time. Click.
Right.
So by the time we got married, and, that was another conversation of, putting all of our money together. But we put all of our money together and we decided to be as one when we started making the phone calls of, okay, first of all, where is your loan debt? Who's holding your loan debt? And we started putting everything together. We're like, yo, we owe $600, almost $700,000 student loan debt, anywhere between 8 to like 12%. And that's when we're like, okay, this is a problem. There's a problem, and we are, if we don't acknowledge that we have a problem, this is something that we're going to continue to like treat like a pet in our house, because we have the income to pay for it. But if we're not aggressively going after it, we're going to treat this like a pet into our 60s and 70s, and we're going to be like, how is it that we don't have any money saved up, but we paid all of this stuff? So we put all of the loan debt into a calculator. Mm-hmm. We followed Sally Mae's payment schedule for us. So after 20 years, that $662,000 of student loan debt would have accrued up to $1.2 million.
If you paid, what, if you didn't pay, or if you paid what they had for?
Yes, if we paid according to their schedule.
Okay.
And I don't know about you, but I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, look, my degree is not worth that much, right? Like, I'm not paying $1.2 million for two. It's just not worth that. And that really sent us down this whole rabbit hole of, okay, we got to figure this out. Who do we go to? How do we figure this out? And we were able to get it done. But,
Yeah, okay, so we're going to get into how you got it done, because I'm sure everyone is curious. So at that point, what were your options? Did you ever consider refinancing or consolidating? And when you did did the research, what did you come to find?
Right. So the biggest issue for us is that we both had private loans that totaled about $150,000. Those are for getting our MBAs. That debt was anywhere between 8 to 9%. So at the time, we couldn't refinance those, right, because they were private loans. We got lucky where the majority of our federal loans were 2%. Right, we were going to school in the early 2000s, so we were able to consolidate at 2%. But that $140,000, though, that was what was killing us. So refinancing really wasn't an option for us, because we're like, well, we're just gonna have to do the work. So the biggest thing that we did was we had to look internally. And I remember we bought whole life insurance, which wasn't the smartest thing for us. And we realized when we were looking at all of our expenses, we started tracking our expenses. We realized on an Excel spreadsheet, we literally just said, okay, this is what's coming in, and then this is what we're spending. And we didn't make any changes for 3 months. We just said, let's watch it. We went back and looked at it, and we said, wait, we're spending the majority of our money going to whole life insurance, right? Because we fell for that whole thing of, yeah, this is like a bank, and this is what rich people use, and all those different things. And it didn't make sense to us, and we finally said, we got to cut the fat. We got to get rid of that. So once we were able to realize what was coming in and what was coming out, and what we were spending really didn't make much sense, it really helped us to just say, okay, do we really need to spend this much money on things like groceries, right? Because we would be at the hospital all the time, and we'd spend like $400 on fast food or $400 in the cafeteria. And then we also spend another $400 on groceries that were going to just wither away because we were at the hospital all the time. So we were able to sit back and say, okay, look, do we need to spend this much money? Let's get down to $200 and then see how it goes. $200 just for groceries to be made at home. And remember, we're just single. We're married, but it's just no kids at this moment. And then we gave each other $50 each to when we go to the hospital, this is what we can buy food with, and that's going to last us for the entire month. So there was a lot of box sandwiches. There was a lot of box, just home lunches and everything. But we made this pact that we weren't going to create debt anymore. That was the other thing. Like, we just said, no more debt. We're not anything that we need to pay for. We need to be able to pay for cash. We did the envelope system. We got on a budget using, just a zero-based budget system. And it was tough at first. There was a lot of arguments. There was a lot of arguments, Jamila. I'm telling you.
Well, okay. So here, let me just interject, because you're in this environment where you're working with other doctors. And can I just ask, maybe just general, what your income was, if you don't mind sharing that as a couple at this point? I'm sure So my income was $350,000 a year. So that was entry level for a trauma surgeon at the time. My wife was like 150. So she was part-time OB. Okay.
And she did that. She made that decision because we were newly married. And what I didn't tell you is that she did her training in New Jersey, and I did my training in Atlanta, Georgia. So we spent a significant portion of our lives not really close together. So she said, well, listen, if I work part-time, it's going to decrease the amount of time that we are not away from each other. And I was like, that's great. Okay, that works. And then what we decided to do also is live off of her salary. And then we used my salary, and then I also did extra work on top of that to put towards the student loans. And like I said, we looked at it all as there's no such thing as her debt, my debt. It was our debt.
Right. Okay. But so you guys are making, I mean, these changes are like, you know, really significant. And I'm wondering, in the environment that you're in, that both of you are doctors, you're around other doctors who have high incomes. Like, for people who are not in this field, you know, earning that much money is like, wow, that's a lot. But that makes sense for, first of all, the lives you're saving, and, you know, the type of, how much time you spent in education, in higher education. But those people now you're working with, and they're like, listen, we want to live the life. We sacrifice all of this. And so how did you get around like your environment being totally different from what you were trying to change internally and do, like save money and not overspend?
So that's a really good question, because that was one of the biggest obstacles, was basically keeping up with the Joneses, right? So you pull into a parking lot, you pull into a doctor's parking lot, and there's like Porsches and Audis and all those different things. And I'm pulling in with a 2014, you know, Nissan Sentra. My wife is pulling in with a Hyundai. And, you know, the big thing for us was I think very early in our career, we realized that what we really wanted was control. And I think in some form or fashion, we were able to really look at money more as a tool that was going to give us the control that we needed. And we looked at those cars. We looked at the houses that everybody said, why don't you buy a house? And we were able to say, look, we already got a house. It's, you know, mortgaged by Sally Mae, right? we got to take care of this first before we can do any type of, you know, thing that's going to be related to our lifestyle. And here's something that I think gives people perspective. So me and my wife were dating for 10 years at this point. We went on our honeymoon. We went on a honeymoon to Australia as well as New Zealand. Around day 3 of the honeymoon, like, you know, we are just like in awe of like everything that we're seeing, the sights and sounds. And you got to remember, we just graduated and we just got married, never took a vacation. And it was just like, wow, like this is what it's like to take a vacation and kind of just relax a little bit after like 12 years of just studying straight, no vacation. And then we sat to each other and we said to each other, listen, like, when's the next time we can do this? Will it be in 5 years, maybe 10 years? And we both looked at each other and were like, yeah, this may never happen, because we have so much debt, which means we got to work. Then we'll have kids. I don't know if this is ever going to happen. And that was really a very sobering moment. And we just said, it was like really awkwardly quiet after that. And that's when we came home from the trip and we're like, we got to put our money together and figure out what to do. And that's what led to these events. So that's why when we started parking in a parking lot, we're like, yeah, like this is not the life that we want. Like we really want to be able to say, hey, if we want to take a trip, you know, and want to take a trip, we can do that. We have the freedom to do that. Or, you know, if we want to go to Ghana or if we want to go to Haiti and do some medical mission work, which we wanted to do, we can do that without having to ask anybody. And that's what really was pushing us. That's the the emotional thing that was pushing us to pay off our debt so quickly, is because that's the life that we wanted, not just the normal pay for this, pay for that. You have this nice thing and, you know, you don't really have much to say about it in 20 years.
Yeah. So when you said you guys got into a lot of fights. So, and I think this is important to know or just talk about, because just because you make a decision and your intention is to do this thing that's going to be different for your life, and maybe you have a partner that agrees, doesn't mean there's not going to be some hiccups and disagreements on the way. So even though you both agreed on the vision of your life, what were the things that you argued about and how did you get through it?
So the big thing for me was I was raised in an immigrant household. My parents are from Ghana, but my parents handled their money separately, right? And then my wife, her parents handled their money together. So I was very like opposed to that at first. I was like, well, why do we need to put our money together? Like we could just have a joint account where we can use this for house expenses. But basically I had the mindset of, you know, your debt is yours, my debt is mine. And, you know, after a while you start thinking about it. She said something that was really interesting. She's like, okay, well, if you're saving up for retirement on your own and I'm struggling to save up for retirement, let's say you hit your number for retirement. That means that you're just going to go and retire and like for the next 10 years, hey, Renee, you catch up. Like, how's that going to work? This doesn't make any sense. Like, how are we going to build things together if we're not putting our money together. And I was like, oh yeah, you're all right. Like, I can't go to Australia by myself. I need you to come with me.
Right.
Right. But it was something as simple as that, made me think about, like, I'm really getting in my way because of something that I was raised with. But for us, me and my wife, it didn't make much sense. And once she was able to show me, like, the power of us putting our money together and what we can do together, that really put us on another level. So that was the first argument. Then the second arguments that we had were like, well, whose debt do we pay off? Because I didn't mention to you, my wife also had some IRS tax issues that she didn't take care of, when she was transitioning from a resident into working on her own. She was doing independent contracting for a year, mainly because her OB program finished before mine. So she was working on her own for a while and had some tax issues. So we're like, well, whose tax do we pay off first? So we argued about that. But we got it. I want people to understand that this was a work in progress. Like, we didn't argue and then all of a sudden we walked away, right? Like, we argued the first month of the budget, we went over the budget, right? And then the second month we were over the budget, but it was less than we were the first time. Then by 5 months in, we were like at zero based, right? 0 cent budget. And then we just continued that, and it works, and for us, the arguments that we have now are so small and so funny, but we laugh at the big arguments that we had before. So
yeah. Okay. So how long did it take when you got serious to pay off this $662,000 worth of student loan debt? How long did that take?
So the initial plan was 15 years. We were going to pay it off. And then I came home and my wife said, I think we can pay it off between 3 and 5 years. And I'm like, okay, like, good evening. Like, how you doing? Like, what's for dinner first? And what she ended up doing is she called the loan company and she asked the representative, can you make like a payment schedule for us for paying off our loans in 10 years, in 5 years, in 3 years? And there was no point in looking at for one because we couldn't do it, right? So then she started, at this point we're budgeting, she started looking at everything and she's like, well, what's the point of paying it off in 15 years and paying off this extra interest when we can do in 10 years? Well, if I show you the 10-year number, well, why can't we do 5 years? And then if you look at the 5-year number and you already look at our expense, I'm telling you, like, we were not extravagant at all. Like, we lived in an apartment that was $900 a month. We lived in a very rural portion of Pennsylvania. We just didn't spend a lot of money. So she said, look, I think we can pay it off anywhere between 3 and 5 years if we are smart about it. So I said, okay. She showed me the numbers. And we just said, okay. So October of 2014, we decided to pay it off. We thought we'd be done by 2019. But we also had some issues with my wife had issues with getting pregnant. So we had some fertility issues. So that threw a rock into things. That was like a little bit of a big issue. But we stuck to our goal of we're no longer creating any more debt.
Right.
So I had to work extra to do and find some cash to pay for IVF. So there were times where for several months we would live 2 weeks away from each other for, literally 7 months, 8 months. But the goal was we're not creating any more debt. So there were times where her fertility treatments would fail. Her doctor would be like, well, the fertility treatments are not, are failing. You're ovulating. Where's Nii? And she's like, he's in Idaho working, So there was a lot of emotional issues that were going on, but we stuck to it. And actually those emotional issues that we had, the financial issues that we had actually made us stronger. So that was the plan basically. And we stuck to the plan. We would meet on a monthly basis, to make sure, hey, like, are we really sticking to the budget? And we were. And like I said, the biggest thing, obviously what I mentioned with the fertility issues and not creating any more debt, that was tough. Living away from each other for 2 weeks was tough. But when we look back on it, I think what we ended up finding out is that, the most humbling thing about this whole issue is that we became really strong together. Our marriage became really strong because we realized that money was just a tool. Money in terms of us being able to accumulate stuff means nothing to us. It really is about what can we do with that money? Can we go and practice in Ghana with people who really need it? Can we go practice in Haiti, in Jamaica? Can we practice in inner city areas and practice without having the pressure of trying to turn the lights on and so forth? Yeah.
Wow. So you guys, how much do you remember? How much on a monthly basis you were throwing at your loans? It had to be a lot.
There was some months we were putting in about 18,000 to about 20,000. And, like I said, we were down to $200 a month on just groceries. So we were just literally just throwing everything away. My parents didn't know what was going on. They're like, what is wrong with you? Like, why are you guys going like this? Why are you going this hard? They didn't understand. A lot of people, our colleagues didn't understand. Why are you bringing in bag lunches? But yeah, there were months where we would put in, close to that amount on a monthly basis and putting it away. We were still able to save, just a little bit to our, towards our 401ks. I also want to say that before we started this, we built an emergency fund. We made it 3 to 6 months of just expenses, and that's it. And the expenses included just minimum of our student loans. And people thought we were crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm also just like amazed at just your story because, again, there are people who would see the amount of income that you had coming in and say to themselves, I'm going to live my life. Like, I've sacrificed so much. And the fact that you guys both were able to get on the same page and have this laser focus is really tremendous. And I know not everyone can relate to having such a high income, but I believe that most people can relate to trying to achieve something that almost seems impossible and or just having debt. And, how you go about it, whether you are going to be like as super intense as Dr. Nii, regardless of your income, like, okay, I'm going to do more than what I think is possible versus I'm going to chill and just pay the minimum is up to you. But I think it's inspiring to hear that even though you were doctors, even though you were making how much of income, that you said to yourselves, I'm going to put a majority of that to my debt and I'm going to bring in bag lunch. Like that to me is amazing. So, one of the things that you talked about is like you were making extra money. So I would love to hear the ways that you were making extra money, like what your work structure was like were you working for a hospital? I'm not too familiar with the terms, but just for people who are interested in how they can make extra money as doctors doing the work that you were doing.
Yeah, so initially as the way where we would work, we were working in a very rural area of Pennsylvania, very hard to recruit. So they made a schedule where they could recruit people to come in and work and then leave. So let me get more granular. So I would work 24 hours in a hospital where I would stay there for 24 hours and I would handle all the surgical emergencies for 24 hours. And then any type of surgery, anything that occurs, I'm in the hospital taking care of that. After that, the next 24 hours, that's the time where I could go home and we're on what's called backup, right? But usually, I'm getting home around I'd say 1 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, because the next morning you're doing some cases, maybe an appendectomy. You don't want to give that to your partner to handle since they're starting their 24 hours fresh. So I would do that for 2 weeks straight. So I'd work 24 hours, and then I'd be 24 hours off or backup. And then the next day after that, so let's say we started Monday, I'm 24 hours on Monday. Then on Tuesday, I'm backup. And then Wednesday, I'm 24 hours in-house. And I would do that for 2 weeks straight, right? And then for 2 weeks, I was off, right? So what I decided to do is, as I was really young in my career, I said, I'll work the additional 2 weeks at another facility as an independent contractor, as a 1099. So I found a temp agency. Just like you guys can think of any type of temp agency for any type of other job, there are temp agencies for physicians. And I would work and go to different places in the United States, whether it's, Idaho or Minnesota or Wisconsin, and I would go and work there. And that's where, when I mentioned before with the fertility issues, I was gone for 2 weeks, and I would do that for months and on. And all of that money, obviously we would make sure there was money left over for taxes and for the IRS, but that money we would just dump right into the student loans. And the thing that you mentioned before that was really important, where you mentioned, how do you guys just decide to just bring a bag lunch and you have all of this high income and all that stuff? I just want to say one quick thing is, the way how we looked at it was this, like, what's the point of bringing all of this income if we can't do what we really wanted to do, which is work in communities that we really wanted to work in, or have a life that we really wanted to have, or say no to certain things at the job that we wanted to say no to. And we felt like with all of this debt in front of us, we couldn't do that, right? Because we'd be scared to either speak up, we'd be scared to say no, we'd be scared that we get fired. So for us, it was just like almost like golden handcuffs, so to speak. And we're like, wait, we put in all these years of sacrifice, all of the weddings that I missed, all of the funerals that I couldn't go to, all of the family events that I really wanted to go to, I missed. And then at the end, hey, hooray, here's your salary, but you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't go do medical humanitarian work. We're like, whoa. this is a problem, right? And that's kind of where we're at. So I just want people to understand that, it's relative to really what you really want to do, right? Like, what do you really want to do with your life? And if you're realizing, yeah, this income for us is great, but I can't do what I really want to do, then what's the point?
Right.
And that's kind of our rationale.
Right. Okay. So you guys paid off the debt. But what were like some of your other motivations? Like after you paid off the debt, now what? Because now I'm thinking, okay, you paid off the debt, then now you're having hundreds of thousands of dollars of income. What's next for you at that stage? And what I like about your story is you also still do things outside of just like being a doctor. You have a podcast. You have other side hustles, I'm sure. And I want to talk about that because some people were like, well, I finished this. Like, this is what I was working towards. The debt is paid off, and now I'm done. Now I can go live my life. But it almost sounds like you trained yourself to live on less. And I would love to know how that now is impacting the way your lifestyle. And I believe you guys have kids now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have
so
2 kids.
Congratulations that actually, all that hard work like came and worked in your favor. But like now what is it like to not have the debt but have that income and still be so motivated?
Right. So during that process, there's a big importance of surrounding yourself with positive people, people who are going through a similar situation as you are. Where we lived, and even from our family standpoint, nobody really understood why we were going through this process. But we were listening to podcasts, listen to your podcast that helped us kind of stay positive. So thank you very much, Jamila, for helping us through this process, right? We listened to a whole bunch of other podcasts where they were talking about debt payoff. We were reading blogs. We were on YouTube. And so forth. So that almost kind of became like our little like virtual mentors, so to speak. You were like our virtual mentor to us. So what we started to realize also is well, paying the debt is important, but also at the same time, let's think about this. I had to really work my butt off to pay, or me and my wife had to work our butt offs to pay this debt off, right, for 3 years. If we just turned what we put into savings or into debt into savings, that's still like another like 15 years of like working really hard to be able to retire. And that's when we're like, okay, it's great to accumulate cash or to save money, but we really got to be smart with our money. We really got to start investing it. Yeah. And that was another thing that I wanted to let people know. We had our MBAs, but we didn't know anything about personal finance. We didn't know how to invest. I was scared of the stock market. My parents lost their job in 1988, with Black Friday. And then my dad lost his job again in 2000. So I was very averse to the stock market. So that was the next step, was learning how to invest on our own. So during that process of listening to your podcast and other podcasts, we really started to think about, okay, how can we get our money to work in various ways other than just saving them and putting them under our bed, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So we started thinking about real estate. We really started thinking about, starting our own business. I started my own podcast to kind of help other doctors realize that there are more important things than just graduating and then just working, right? Like there are important things like maybe you want to go to another country, or maybe you want to just start, inspiring other people to kind of have a thought process similar to yours. So it was very interesting. Once we got out of debt, the next thing was, well, I enjoy what I do as a trauma surgeon, but I don't want to do this all the time. Mm-hmm. And, I did an episode on my show where I talked about not living your life like, I think a lot of professionals, whether you're a physician, you're a teacher, you're an engineer, what have you, you kind of feel like your life begins once you graduated, right? And that was a really hard thing for me to kind of let go of. But my life had already started before then. And there was a lot of things that I thought were risky that I wanted to just take those risks, and I didn't do that. And one of the things that I really wanted to really focus on was really growing this podcast and really taking some risks with other business ventures and really pulling back with medicine. That has been a very difficult situation for me because it's just like, well, you went to school for all these years and you sacrificed for all these years. What do you mean you want to pull back, right? You're letting down all of these different people who were behind you. But once again, it came back down to like, it's really important to really focus on living your own life and living your own truth. So that's where we're at right now, is really focusing on what's important to us. The podcast is very important to us. Medical humanitarian work is very important to us, as well as teaching other people that, it's great to have this income, but if you are basically a slave to that lifestyle, what is really important here. So
yeah, and I've had doctors or lawyers on the show before, and just other professionals, even my own story, it's like you do spend a lot of time in a field, potentially a lot of education and money, especially doctors and lawyers, especially doctors. And you come to this point where you do all this work, you accumulate all this debt, and you may realize, wait, this is not what I want to do. Like, the sunken cost fallacy, where it's like you feel like you might as well stay in this. And the emotional toll and the identity factor that, especially as immigrants, like I know what that's like, where I didn't have as much pressure because my mom was pretty supportive of every move I've made. But I know that for other people, like, that is, their kid is a doctor or an engineer or lawyer, like that is all they know. Like, what do you mean you're going to go podcast? What is that? So I feel like...
You sound like my mother, actually.
Well, I feel like it's important to talk about that because I know there's some journeyers listening and they're like, yeah, I want to do other things. So here's the thing. I want to talk about this. There are some people who like love their work. So they still want to be a lawyer and doctor, but they have other things they want to do. And the possibility of still pursuing those two tracks, right, in life at the same time, right? Maybe, one is your full-time thing and one just remains your side thing, and that's okay. And then there are people where it's just like they're in a profession and they really don't want to be there and they want to do something totally different. So for you, it sounds like you enjoy being a doctor, but you're getting pulled towards the other creative things that you want to do. Like, so how are you looking at that? How are you having this discussion with your family? And what's the emotional roller coaster that you're on with this?
That's a really, really good question. That's exactly what we go through, which is, hey, like you said, the sunken cost thought, right? And so for me right now, it's, okay, well, we've been able to save some money, but let's take some chances now, right? Like, about the safe tax. Everything that you just said, basically, about being a teacher, a lawyer, an engineer, or business, like all of those things are all safe things that our parents wanted us to do. And for me, the big thing for me is I want my kids to see that, oh, wow, dad, he had to pay the safe tax, so to speak. But also at the same time, like, I want to be able to take chances and start something with some seed money that I just saved up and just see where it goes. So that when I'm 80 or 90 and I'm in a nursing home, I could say I did everything that I could do, before, I take my last breath. And I think that's what's driving me the most right now is like, look, like, let's do everything that we can right now. Let's take the chances that we need to take because we're still young, right? And the key thing that I think, I struggled with before was let me try to save as much money so that I can retire early. Mm-hmm. But the key thing I think I had to turn and look at things is well, let me buy some time or let me use that money to put or invest in myself so that I can do the things that I may not want to do, right? So, for example, like you said, I love being a trauma surgeon. I just don't want to do 24 hours on, 24 hours off, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. I don't want to do that when I'm in my 50s or in my 60s, right? Like some surgeons or some trauma doctors are doing right now, right? Because I don't want to have to be spending my money on things that I really don't need to be spending my money on, right? I want to be able to kind of have a lifestyle that I really would like to do and what I feel to be really impactful. So that's what I go through. If you ask my mother, even to this day, she's like, what is this? Like, I want my son to be a surgeon. That's it. And I'm like, but Mom, you don't understand. Like, I can do that, and I am doing that. But what's the point if I'm not really happy doing that all the time?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, our parents, too, like, they come from just a different world of the sacrifices they made. And, they did all this so we can do this. And then, and give us these opportunities. And they don't realize, because I think oftentimes they've been so... their dreams, have been just thrown out and or pushed down, and so where they couldn't really live their lives. So they're like, hey, well, I couldn't do this. Like, what? Like, that's not the real world. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit about the pandemic and how that impacted you. I'm wondering as you're talking as a trauma surgeon of all things. Like, I think you see firsthand the things that we see on TV and it's like more glamorized. Like you're living with this on a day-to-day basis when you're working. Did that make you also look at life differently? Like, or just going after your goals? I'd love to hear that perspective because a lot of us don't experience that firsthand. And then we can talk about how the pandemic impacted you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, I'm used to living my life 4 years at a time. Mm-hmm. Hey, college, can't wait to go, and I hope I get into med school. All right, now I'm in med school, man. I wonder what it's like to be in residency. Then residency, I wonder what it's going to be like when I am working on my own. Like you're always, at least for me, I was always looking 4 years ahead and not really kind of smelling the roses and enjoying life. And when the pandemic hit, it was just like, wow. There are people my age who are actually on a ventilator dying right now. Some of my colleagues, they ended up on a ventilator, right? So life can just come at you that quickly. I think definitely last year taught me the importance of understanding that you got to live every day to the fullest. Like, I have to be very, very, very present for this interview with you because I don't know when's the next time we're going to do this. So I don't know if you remember, but I interviewed you last year on my show. Actually, I had COVID during that time. It took me forever. I don't know if you remember, like I kept coughing and I couldn't get my voice. I don't know if you remember, but I had a hard time like really recovering from COVID. So it taught me a really important lesson about just living life, doing everything that you want to do, connecting with people, and just enjoying today for exactly what it is for today, because you ain't going to have it again. From a medical standpoint and taking care of people, it's been really difficult to take care of people and to, you be the last person that they see, because that family is not allowed to be around the patient, or to see someone say goodbye to someone with an iPad. That for me breaks my heart, right? But, it is what it is, but it's extremely sobering. And it's been a very, and what I do already, and I tell people look at me and they're like, I'm the type of person that you never want to see, right? Like, if it's a pediatrician, everybody's happy to see their pediatrician or their OB or their family medicine doctor for the most part. Nobody ever wants to see a trauma surgeon. So for me, what I do on a daily basis, I see people who are literally on the verge of dying in seconds. So for me to be touched by what I see, even with COVID, is extremely powerful. And, I know that we're going through what we're going through right now. It's really tough. So I just really want people to understand, the importance of just really living life to the fullest, really having strong, pushback conversations with your doctor to really understand what's going on, and really to understand that there's science out there. Trust your doctor and what they're saying. And I'll leave it at that. I know that it could be controversial, but I always say just make sure you talk to your doctor and have a really good conversation with them.
Yeah, and with that, so what you also encourage, so say the name of your podcast. I want to talk a little bit about what you encourage doctors to do. Yeah,
so the podcast is called Docs Outside the Box.
Mm-hmm. And you encourage doctors to think outside of what their profession is and start podcasts or just brands. And I want you to talk about that because there's someone listening who's on their way to becoming a doctor and they think that's all it is, and maybe that's all they do, and that's wonderful. Or there are people listening who are like, you know what, I have something else I want to share. So why do you encourage this in doctors and other professionals, and how do you define or help them find their voice if it's outside of just doctor work, like something else they enjoy doing?
Yeah. So there's a ton of doctors out there right now who, they feel like they can express themselves and say, maybe I want to go on TV, and maybe I want to coach other doctors, or maybe I want to go and do medical humanitarian work, or maybe I want to do whatever it may want to be. But, the rigid structure of medicine oftentimes doesn't allow you to express that. So Docs Outside the Box is really a safe space where we talk about the 3 M's. The 3 M's are really money, mindset, and mission. So money is we focus on personal finance. We focus on paying off debt. We focus on investing, right? Because we feel like money is a surrogate for control. And then we also talk about mindset. We really focus on the growth mindset. So what do you mean? You spent the last 12 to 14 years becoming a physician. What do you mean you can't embrace how to start a podcast, or, get into real estate, or, whatever it may be that you're interested in, but you just think that, well, I'm just a physician. I can only do this. No, we got to get out of the fixed mindset and really focus on the growth mindset. And then the last M is mission. Right? Although as a physician, we, are advocating for our patients, I really like to highlight stories of things that we don't normally see, how we can advocate. That's social advocacy rise, obviously with what happened last year, but also going to another country and practicing and understanding how medicine is practiced in third world countries. So these are the things that we talk about in the podcast. We feel like anybody can listen to this, whether you are a professional, whether you are trying to be in healthcare, whether you're not in healthcare, it doesn't matter. But I think that these 3 things that we talk about are really going to help a lot of people. It's very interesting. Me and my wife have really interesting conversations about some of the pop culture things and how to relate it to the 3 M's. So we have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, well, so now that, and I love that I've seen more of your content. Instagram kind of hides like the algorithm changes and you don't see people's stuff, and then you start seeing it. So I love that you and her are doing like more things together, like videos. So for that though, how are you balancing like having kids, you both being doctors, I don't know if you call what you do a side hustle or, businesses, like how are you doing all of this? Because for someone myself who is also a mom, I'm just like, I'm tired, I'm done, like, like, I don't know how much more I want to do of all the things. And I luckily left my corporate job. So it is journey to launch and then kids and just personal life, which is a lot. So how are you balancing that together and still making it work and having the motivation to do all the things?
So for the record, Jamila, if you walk away from it right now, then that's going to deflate me. So I'm following your lead. So the fact that you walked away from your corporate job and you're doing what you're doing and living in Brooklyn, you know what I'm saying? Like that's, you just are our relationship and monetary financial goals. So that's super dope what you're doing. So, but it really comes down to that virtual mentorship, right? I listen to you, I see what you're doing. I'm like, well, if she can do it, then maybe we should try to do that. Now, back to specifically of your question with balance. Look, I don't think there's anything. I don't know if there's such thing as balance, right? Like we just try to make it work. We try to make it work. And because our life has transformed so much from 2014 to now, like our life is very much around how can we save as much money as we can? How can we have an impactful life with each other, as a couple? And how can we have, children who are kind of raised in this environment? And for us, we're just like, you know what? That's our podcast. That's our content, right? So we use that, like those conversations that you see on Instagram. These are conversations that me and my wife have all the time, right? Or the episodes that we have with other guests. Like these are the things that we're talking about. So we're just like, look, we might as well just share this on the show and talk about it in a fashion that's really, it's not codified. You don't have to do any code switching or anything like that. We're just talking the way how we want to talk, right? And I think that's where it resonates with a lot of people because they're just like, well, like my doctor sounds just like me. It's like, yeah, like we are just you. It's just that, we it's just so happy we just had a whole bunch of student loan debt, but we're just like you. It's just that we want to be able to live our lives on our own terms. And that's what continues to push us, right? And there are times where like an hour before this, I'm like, man, like, am I doing the right thing, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about, Jamil. Right. Like, you're like, am I doing the right thing? But, it really comes down to, and I want people to really understand this, it really comes down to what kind of impact do you want to have, right? And even if, like, the show never takes off, I can live with myself at the age of 80 in a nursing home and say that, you know what, I gave everything that I could out there. It didn't take off, but I spoke my truth and I lived my life. And me and my wife are expressing to everyone that, look, like, it really, like, we didn't fall into the 2-income household trap or anything like that. We literally are living our lives and, just enjoying it and having fun. And, for us, we just like, you know what, let's just share it. Yeah. And for us, that's how it's become so easy to keep doing this.
Yeah. And I think that's important to note because I know there's so many people who are listening and they're like, well, I have a story, but they don't think it's notable or something that people want to hear. And I'm just like, and I talked about this. I did a FinCon big idea speech. And I just talked about this, that it's not about getting to the 1 million download number or 1 million people reach, like goals, but honestly, bigger than that is talking to that one person. That's how I started. It was like, okay, even as I'm talking to you, I'm like, I want to talk to that one person who's listening right now, that one journeyer who is like doubting what they can give to the world or who is in a professional environment and has something else to do or is earning a lot of money and can do more in terms of paying it off. Whatever. I'm talking to whoever's listening, and I'm very specific in the way I'm thinking and asking these questions. I'm just like, listen, someone wants to hear what you have to say. And if one person wants to hear it, then another person wants to hear it. And it may take longer than you want it to get the ball rolling. But once that impact starts happening, one person by one person, that is the change. That is the payback that makes it all worth it.
So you hit it on a point. So I did an episode recently. So I used to take the bus from Irvington, New Jersey, when I started high school, from Irvington, New Jersey to Newark, New Jersey, every morning to go to the high school that I went to. On the way to the high school, we would pass by this medical school called UMDNJ. It's called now Rutgers University, what have you. And I remember, like, I would do homework on the bus. people, there's music blaring in the back. You know how it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know how the bus is, right? And whether it's Brooklyn or Newark, it's the same thing, right? And I would do homework. And I remember once we got past that stop, I would always look at that med school and I'd be like, I want to go there. I want to go there. I want to go there. And I remember I would run track at night. And sometimes we'd go to New York and take the train into New York and come back before our parents even knew. I'd come back. But the one thing I always know, on the bus ride back, I would look to see the lights on at that medical school. And nobody knew this, at the time. And as I started, when I went to college and I would come home, the same thing. I'd take that bus back and forth and I'd see that med school. I never ended up going to that med school. I didn't get accepted into that med school. It didn't matter. But I decided to share that on an episode. That was one of the most highly downloaded episodes ever, because all of these pre-med students were like, yo, like, I live in Brooklyn. I live right next to, right behind SUNY Downstate. Or, I live in this part of the town in Detroit or in Chicago. And like nobody, I felt like that episode spoke to me. Like nobody sees me and understands what it's like to live in these neighborhoods, or to take a bus here or to take a cab there. And you look at this institution of where you want to be a part of and you feel like you can't be a part of it. Can you give us more of that? And I was like, oh, snap. I didn't know that little story would resonate with people. So I really want people to understand that, like, our biggest superpower, and I'm not saying it in a cliche term, people say that a lot, but our biggest superpower is the ability to share our story, right? Because there's so many people who are listening to you, are looking to hear from someone who comes from your background, and they don't hear from other people. They can't get on TV. They can't get on radio. But maybe from your podcast, you can change their life and let them know that, hey, it's okay if you are, staying late and you're keeping books underneath the library table so nobody knows where where you put it back. Like nobody understands your experience quite like you. But there are a lot of people who have a similar background to you, and if you can express your story, it really can resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Nii, tell everyone what's next for you. I'm curious to know, like, where you're going next with what you want to do professionally and with your content, and then we'll get into where they can follow you and listen to your podcast.
Yeah, so where I'm going now next is I want to build out a network for the podcast. So want to build out particularly with physicians of color, men, women, obviously, and really build out a podcast network where we're talking about the things that we want to talk about, right, around those 3 M's, and then continue to expand from there. So that's what I want to do for the podcast standpoint. And then obviously we want to have a summit eventually also.
Okay.
From a professional standpoint, I'm at a point where me and my wife are like, maybe what we really want from a medical standpoint can't be done here in the United States. So we're strongly considering moving to Ghana and practicing there. And I'm telling you, it's an amazing feeling when someone will travel miles or wait hours to take care of you, or for you to take care of them. And they're very gracious and very, just welcoming of that. And it's really as close to a professional reboot as we call it. So we're really thinking about moving overseas and practicing and doing all this. So, and even obviously raising our kids overseas also. So
wow, that sounds wonderful. So now we have to definitely follow you. So tell everyone where they can follow you online and listen to your podcast.
Yeah, so if you want to, follow me, you can follow me anywhere on social media. But the best place to see what I'm really up to is on Instagram. My handle is at Dr Nii Darko. That's DrNiiDarko. Or you can listen to the podcast, which is called Docs Outside the Box. Anywhere you listen to anywhere you listen to Jamila's podcast, Journey to Launch, it's the same place where you can find Docs Outside the Box. And then my homepage is DrNiiDarko.com, and you can learn more about me.
Okay, and I'm going to link all of that in the episode show notes. And I can't wait for everyone to hear this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.